Hello, and a warm welcome to everyone tuning in, whether it's your morning, afternoon, or evening in your part of the world. My name is Nadia, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's Microsoft Reactor livestream. Before we dive into the main event, I'd like to remind everyone about the Reactor Code of Conduct. Our aim is to cultivate a positive and inclusive environment for all participants, so let's keep our interactions respectful and supportive. Today, we have a special guest with us, Nick, who runs the company Built to Roam, which focuses on building rich mobile applications, and he is also a Microsoft MVP for Windows development. Nick will be guiding us through how to build multi-platform applications with .NET and the UNO platform. So this is part of his Build Apps with .NET series. Throughout the session, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to address as many as possible. We'll also be sharing additional resources and links in the chat, including information on how you can aspire to become a Microsoft MVP. For those who want to revisit today's session, you can do so on our Reactor YouTube channel. Without further ado, let's give a warm virtual round of applause to our fantastic speaker as we pass the spotlight over to him. Take it away, Nick.
Thanks, Nadia. Hey, everyone. So as Nadia mentioned, my name is Nick Randolph. I currently run a company here in Australia called Built to Roam. And as part of that, we're part of the core development of the UNO platform. So the session today is the first of a three-part series looking at the UNO platform. Today's more of an overview session, and then the subsequent sessions will focus on C Markup and the UNO platform extensions. For those who aren't familiar with the UNO platform, we're going to go to a few things today. Firstly, we'll start obviously with an overview, but then we'll touch on a number of the updates that have come in the 5.x release. And if I say 5.x, because we released 5.0 last year, and then we're in the process of, we just released 5.1, and 5.2 is just around the corner. And so we'll look at some of the improvements that have been made there, to deliver an overall experience for building cross-platform apps. So things like we delivered on .NET 8, so we're ready to go with the Microsoft announcements and the GA around that. And as part of the 5.0 platform, we brought an additional technology such as C Markup to do so that for designing your apps, you can now do it in both XAML and C Markup. We now have a Figma to C Markup plugin. We've got brand new support for hot reload. And updated support for the MVUX pattern, which is our take on how we do state management within applications. And that's not to say that the more traditional MVVM approach isn't supported, but it is, of course. We've got a couple of new workshops, and that's under continual development along with our samples. In the 5.1, we just released the UNO SDK, which is providing a better integration with Visual Studio to give a much more stable experience within Visual Studio and VS Code. We now have a live wizard, so we'll walk through that today as part of the getting started experience. And we now have responsive view as part of the toolkit. All of this and much more information is available at platform.uno. But let's actually delve into the platform. And one of the reasons why the UNO platform is actually called a platform is that it doesn't seek to just provide a cross-platform UX framework. So, if you look at a lot of the other frameworks that are out there for building multi-platform or cross-platform applications, they provide the core nuts and bolts of what you need to build, develop, and release applications for all target platform or a number of target platforms. So whether you're building iOS or Android or Windows or Linux, the goal with the UNO platform is to provide a single source code base that you can actually build those applications. But sitting on top of that and expanding on that, we've got a number of components that are designed to make that process of building an app end to end, from design all the way through to deployment, that much easier. So there's kind of 4 pillars that we'll talk about today in terms of the overall platform experience. We'll talk about flexibility and the choices that you have with the platform. We'll talk about the productivity options that you have. We'll talk about how you deliver a rich user experience and how you go about making your application beautiful and how you integrate with the design kind of experience. In terms of flexibility, one of the key things about the UNO platform is that we recognize developers will both develop on any platform, they'll want to target any platform, and they'll typically come with their own choice of IDEs. So whether you're a developer that works predominantly on a Mac or Windows or even Linux, we've got the tools there to support you. You can choose between Visual Studio, VS Code, or Writer. And you can target any of the number of platforms that are supported by the UNO platform. So whether it be web, mobile, desktop, embedded, you can basically go through the same process, the same source code, and deploy out to those different platforms. In the 5.0 timeframe, we actually released additional choice, which gives you now the ability to do your markup or your design of your applications in C Markup. We'll see that in the first demo today. The more traditional approach for Windows-based applications is to use XAML, and you'll recognize that a lot of the syntax or a lot of the styling has come from XAML and is available in C Markup. As I mentioned before, you have a choice of state management. You can use MVVM or you can use MVUX, which is a more reactive style pattern for building applications. Of course, if you've got your own pattern and your own toolkit and your own libraries, you can bring those along. At the end of the day, the UNO platform is based on .NET. So if you have a .NET package that you want to bring in, you can bring it in and use it within your applications. I mentioned before that we've got this thing called C Markup. And so on the left, you can see here an example of the C Markup page. And on the right, you've got the equivalent of XAML. Okay, and as you can see, if you go line by line, you can see that there's a lot of strong parallels between the two. So for example, where you see a grid in XAML, you are now seeing a grid within C Markup. Where you're setting safe area on the grid in XAML as an attribute, you're now seeing those as an extension method in C Markup. And so there's strong parallels there, which means that anybody can switch between C Markup and XAML with very minimal, if any, learning curve. MVUX for state management. The goal here was to make it a much more declarative and get rid of a lot of the boilerplate code that you would typically write if you're using, say MVVM. So right here, we're seeing that this counter model, which you would typically use in place of a view model. So this would be what you're using to structure the data or the state management for a particular page, is made up of things like states. So here we're seeing a counter state and a step state, and a method that's going to then increment the counter with the appropriate step. And so you can see this is all very declarative, it's all very reactive in nature. And then the other goal is to make it immutable and make sure that things are done with an asynchronous approach first. And of course, all of this is very testable because at the end of the day, it's just a C# class. We've also spent a lot of time working on the getting started experience for the UNO platform. One of the things we recognize is because we're a platform, there are a lot of different features that we offer, whether those are coming from the theme library, the toolkit library, the extension libraries, or some of the other experiences we're delivering. It was very difficult to get started because there was so much information to take on board. And so one of the things we built was a getting started wizard that's integrated into the create new project within Visual Studio. And so we'll touch on those in the first demo and actually walk through that wizard experience so you can get an idea of the various options that are available. One of the big advances we had in the .NET 8 timeframe was the support for hot reload. This is something that we've worked to make sure that we've got support within both Visual Studio and VS Code, and is supported across all of the target platforms that the UNO platform supports. It works in both devices and emulators, and it's been updated to support all of the common things that you'd expect to do as part of that development experience, whether you're working in XAML, C# Markup, whether you're creating bindings, adding resources, doing data templates or styles. The idea is that all of that is supported within the hot reload pattern. So you can go ahead and make those changes as your application is running. Okay, time for a demo. So let me switch to the code window and we'll get started with the first of the demos. As I mentioned, we're going to start by going through the wizard experience. And here we'll see the create new project experience within Visual Studio. And we're going to select the UNO platform app. Now, obviously, if you don't already have the templates installed, if you go to the marketplace or the extension manager, you should be able to find the UNO platform, add that as the extension within Visual Studio, and that will give you this UNO platform app project template. So we'll go ahead and click next on that. We'll give it a name, specify the location, and we'll go ahead and click create. And the next thing we'll see is the UNO platform template wizard. This is actually a Windows application. It is actually an UNO application running in the context of the Visual Studio extension. And so initially we give you two kind of sort of preset or pre-configuration options. And so these are designed to provide a very quick way for you to get started, either with a blank or a vanilla offering. And so basically what you'll get there is the bare bones of an Uno-based application, enough to get you started so that you can build, deploy, and start writing your own code. And particularly if you're familiar with the Uno platform and you have your own bits that you want to bring, that would be a great option. For people who aren't familiar or just want to get some guidance on how they should structure their application, the recommended preset is a great way to go. It does make use of things like MVUX, which is our sort of pattern for state management. And it adds in a whole bunch of the extension modules around things like configuration, location, as well as including resources for testing, etc. Now, if these two presets don't work for you, you can go ahead and click Customize. It doesn't actually matter which one you click on to do Customize. Essentially, what you'll end up with is whichever you select is actually just the pre-configuration for the Customize page. So I'll click on that, Customize, and I'll just expand out this a little bit so there's more space. The first option is framework. This page gets updated time to time. We've just dropped support in the wizard for Net 7, as it's been replaced with Net 8. And as we get into the preview cycles for Net 9, and we've got confidence that we've got something that's stable to offer, we'll have to actually update that to bring the Net 9 preview option available. Of course, if you're game to give it a go already, there's nothing stopping you creating a .NET 8 application and then updating to the 9 preview and seeing how it goes. Obviously, if you run into issues, provide us feedback because that will help us with that process of testing that. Under platforms, this is where you can basically pick which target platforms you want to target. So initially, we'll click, just go with the presets for that. For presentation, we can pick between MVM and MVUX. So for this first example, we'll go with MVUX. For markup, choose between XAML and C# markup. In the theme options, we're going to go with material theming, and we've got some options to include switches for being able to toggle between dark and light themes, so we'll enable that as well. Under extensions, we're going to leave this blank for the time being, but here is where you would use things like dependency injection. So if you're familiar with the iHost builder pattern that's been made popular with ASP.NET, you could go ahead and actually enable that using the dependency option here. And that gives you some nice options around navigation and sort of an abstraction to make that nice across both C# code, XAML, and in the code behind for your view models. So. And then lastly, down here, there's also some locking options that, again, tie back into that dependency injection. Under features, we're going to enable the toolkit. That gives us things like the navigation bar and some other controls that are nice to use. And you'll see here that there's various options for enabling things like multi-threading for the WASM and .NET MAUI Embedding, which we'll see in a bit later on. There are some other options around things like authentication and testing projects that you can enable. And we've even got things like some CI pipeline templates to get you started. So these are basically an initial offering that will work for Azure Pipelines and GitHub Actions that basically starts you with the ability to build your application in the CI pipeline. We're going to go ahead and click Create. And this is going to create our application within Visual and open it within Visual Studio. So this will take a second or two to launch. And once it's launched, you'll actually see that there's a initial getting started page that displays in the middle. So if you need links to things like the tutorials or the documentation, you can click on the links there. And in the Solution Explorer, you'll see that a number of projects have been created. Let me just condense that for a second and then expand them out individually. So your core application is actually this class library at the bottom, and you can see here that this has got things like your main page, and it's got resources and your app.cs class, which is kind of like the entry point for an Uno application. And then you have individual platform projects that are available here. And so these are what you click on to and set as startup projects for debugging and running on individual platforms. So for example, we can click the GTK option, select a startup project, and we can go ahead and run that. Now, for the purpose of this application, we're actually going to switch to an initial application that I've already got set up, and it's a simple calculator. So this is basically a simple application that is designed, as you'd imagine, as a calculator. And we're going to walk through adding a few controls and just breaking out that experience as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Again, I've still got the GTK option selected here, and we've got some initial code here that defines the layout of our page. If you go through this, if you're familiar with XAML, you'll see that, again, this is fairly similar syntax to what you'd expect to see in XAML. We can see that we've got our main page, and inside there we have a border. And inside that we've got a grid with essentially 4 rows being defined, and we'll see those as the application displays. Now, initially, we don't have very much content here. We literally have a header at the top, and we've got an output and keypad at the bottom. And those are basically these outer rows, and we've got some free space in the middle. And you see those are defined by these placeholder values, and they're just text blocks in code. Now, with the application running, we're actually going to switch these out. So I'm going to comment these out, and I'm actually going to enable these other ones. And I'll just step you through these. So if I go to definition on this, scroll down, we can see that the header is basically made up of a number of different controls. So we've got a toggle button here. So this is actually going to be used for switching between dark and light theme when we enable it. And the nice thing about this is, rather than us having to create this user control that we're then going to reuse everywhere, we've simply just created a method, and that's going to return these controls for us. This becomes very relevant when we scroll down to things like the keypad at the bottom here. And what we're seeing here is that the keypad is basically made up of a number of rows of buttons, and we're just calling the same method over and over again. And so from a XAML perspective, this would be the equivalent of reusing the same user control multiple times. But in C Markup, it's just a matter of calling the same code method again and again and again. Okay, if I hit save on this and actually switch back to my application, what we see is that without having to restart my application, it's now being skinned according to the elements that I now have being defined in my methods. And it's now looking like a calculator. Now, as I mentioned, I've already got some stuff wired up here. And in fact, I've actually got a data context set up, which is our bindable view model. And you might be thinking, okay, where's this bindable view model it's coming from? Okay, so this is MVUX, or part of MVUX. And essentially, we're defining our main model as a record, so it's immutable. We're defining a number of states, so is dark. So this is going to be used for toggling between dark and light theme. We've got our calculator that basically tracks the current instance of our calculator. You'll notice that our increment command is basically to update the calculator. So every time you hit on a button, it's going to be calling this input method. If I go to definition on that, you'll see that is a method that returns a new instance of the calculator class.
Hi, Nick. So sorry to jump in. Is it possible to just zoom a little bit on
100%.
your screen?
There we go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Not a problem. Okay, so as I was saying, that we actually have this input method that basically returns a new instance of the calculator class. And so what that means is every time the input comes in, we're getting a new instance of those. So we're not having to worry about actually mutable objects that often cause us, threading issues and those types of things. The other thing we'll notice about this main model is that we're not implementing, things like iNotify property change. So then, okay, well, how's this new calculator instance being updated in the UI? All of that happens through the use of code generation, and that's where our bindable main model is coming from. So this bindable main model, if I go to definition on that, you'll actually see that it's a bunch of generated code that essentially wraps our main model and makes it available for data binding. Okay, so all of the properties that you have in your main model are going to be available via the bindable main model, and we can data bind on them. So if I come back to our main page, and as we scroll down here to our header, for example, we're going to see that the isCheck property of this toggle button is data bound using this syntax to the isDark property on our view model. Okay, so that's basically, and because we've already got that wired up, and when we change the layout of our page, that calculator is already active, so it's already working. Now, the only thing that's not really working is this toggle for the dark and light theme switching. So if I come back to my model, the reason for that is I basically defined this as a single state that's set to false and is not being updated by anything. But let me just update my model. I'm going to actually comment this initial constructor out, and I'm going to come down here and enable this other constructor that actually takes our theme service as a parameter. Now, I'm not going to hit save on this view model at the moment, because what will happen is if I do that, then this code in here is going to start complaining. And so before I press save and cause a hot reload to take place, I'm actually going to come in here and fix this. So I'm going to do this.get theme service, and that will provide us a theme service that I can pass to my bindable view main model, and that gets passed to our main model. Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit save on those, and hot reload is going to kick in. We don't really see it changing in the UI much, but now when I toggle this button, it's actually going to toggle between the light and dark stage. Okay, so in this demo, we've basically seen the two things. We've seen the wizard in terms of getting started and the various options that are available there. And we've seen the hot reload and the C# markup experience for our simple calculator. So let me switch back to the slides for a minute. And we're just going to talk a little bit more about the richness of the platform. Now, as a UI platform, you'd expect that there's a lot of base controls, things available that you can use within your applications. But again, because we're a platform, there's a bunch of non-UI codes and APIs that are available as well. So for those who have worked with the UWP or the WinUI framework, you'll know that there's actually parts of that that don't relate necessarily to the UI, and those are available in a cross-platform way via the UNO platform as well. So let's dig into those. In terms of actual UI controls, so the core platform supports a vast number of controls. So here's just a subset of them. So, the standard options, things like toggle button that we've seen, text blocks, grids, buttons, all of those standard type of controls are available on the platform. Next, we have some of the toolkit controls. So these are coming from both the community toolkit. So if you look at the Windows community toolkit, that's now available not just for Windows, but all the UNO targets as well as the UNO toolkit. And here we've got a number of controls that help make it easier and better to build applications that are going to work across both desktop and mobile and web. And so if you're looking at just WinUI, a lot of those controls are very desktop orientated and miss things like the navigation bar that you'd expect to see on a lot of mobile-based applications. So the UNO toolkit brings those and lights up that experience. We've also got a number of UI helpers. So again, in the UNO toolkit, there are a number of sort of extensions and helpers that again just help us do things like, for example, the safe area allows us to basically make sure that we're not the UI of our application is not going to interfere with the icons at the top or the status bar at the bottom, etc. So, there's also the community toolkit and some extensions and helpers that are available in that as well. In terms of non-UI APIs, again, as I mentioned, this is a full platform. So, things like being able to access file storage all the way through to things like clipboard, capable around sharing and those types of things are all supported by these sort of non-UI APIs. In addition to the standard APIs, there's also the UNO extensions libraries. And so these are designed to basically pick off where you'd expect from a core library to actually build on top of those and make it easy to do things like logging and drive things through configuration, etc. And so for anybody, again, familiar with the sort of the ASP.NET world, we have essentially an iHost that you use iHost Builder to set up. And in a later demo, we're actually going to see this as we start to get into wiring up things like authentication and some other features of the application are all built on top of that host builder experience. And in a way, this is not too dissimilar to the approach that MAUI have taken. They actually have essentially their own host builder. And again, you can register dependencies with those that you can then access throughout your application. Okay, I mentioned the extensions, and one of those is the support for navigation. UWP and WinUI out of the box gives you a good navigation framework. So there's use of the ability to navigate between pages on a frame, but it doesn't provide an abstraction beyond that for things like going between tabs on it using a tab bar control, or within the navigation view, changing out pages that are going to be rendered. It also doesn't provide an abstraction that works across both code behind, which is obviously supported on Frame, because you can use frame.navigate, but also you want to be able to drive things from, say, XAML or from your view model. And so the navigation pattern that's available via UNO extensions allows us to do all of those. And we'll see those a couple of times in the subsequent demos. We've also got support for authentication. So, if you want to integrate with either MSAL or one of the other OCD providers, you can do that. If you've just got a very simple web authentication, you can use the web provider for that. or you can just provide, build your own that sits on top of our sort of custom API for that. And the nice thing about the authentication system is that it then wraps things like sending the authentication token as either a cookie or as part of the header request through to any of the HTTP services that you might be then calling. There's also support for rich third-party controls. So we have support for things like live charts and MAUI, so there are a number of providers for those. And recently, as part of the 5.0 wave, we supported the MAUI embedding. So what this means is that if there are controls provided by a vendor for MAUI, you can actually extend out the UNO-based application to include those controls. Now, obviously, those will be limited to the platforms that are supported by the MAUI controls. So that if they're supporting, iOS, Android, and Windows, those will be available on when you run the UNO application on those target platforms. Okay. In terms of building a beautiful application, one of the goals of the UNO platform is that everything should be pixel perfect. And by that, we mean that if you're building and designing an application on one platform, so for example, if you're building on Windows, when you then run it on other platforms, it should render exactly the same. And this is a kind of different philosophy to some of the other platforms and their approach, where they'll make use of the native look and feel of controls, and then they won't necessarily render the same on all platforms. Even though UNO platform does make use of the native controls, they're styled in a way to make them pixel perfect across the various platforms. We also have support for multiple themes or design styles. And so you can pick between Material, Fluent, or Cupertino. So out of the box, the Fluent is the default. It comes as part of WinUI and is the default across all platforms. But a lot of applications choose to use the Material themes, which we'll see in demos in a few minutes. We've got lightweight styling support. So essentially what this means is that you can override any of the styling resources at any level within your application, and they'll be appropriately applied to the controls thereafter. We do have support for responsive, and so one of the things that was introduced quite recently is this notion of a responsive view and some responsive attached properties that you can then use to control how your application behaves for different configurations of your application. So whether it be in portrait or landscape, whether it be running on an iOS phone or an iPad, you can actually control the way that the elements are presented on the UI using those controls. And lastly, we've got support for Figma and the ability to not only design your application in Figma, but then export the code in either XAML or C Markup and ingest it within your application. With that, we're going to get into a number of demos. So we're going to look at some of the extensions to start with the authentication and navigation. We'll look at MAUI embedding and how that can be used to expand out your application with controls. We'll take a look at some of the non-UI APIs that are available. And lastly, we'll finish with looking at Figma and the plugin that we've got to support generating XAML and C# markup for your application. Okay, so let me go back to demo and jump to the code again. Let me close down our calculator. And we're going to start with the tube player. Now, for those who haven't seen one of our demo workshop applications, we have a workshop that's essentially a YouTube player. And so it's called Tube Player. And if you go to the documentation, there's a full workshop that actually allows you to step through that from both using Figma, but also if you don't have Figma, it walks you through basically laying out all the controls, connecting to YouTube, and actually pulling up content. So it's a very straightforward application. It's got a number of states, so a list of items with various states for that sort of search experience. So basically, progress for loading, not found, and when you've got an error connecting to the service. But then when you actually click on one of these items, you then get the details and you get a media player experience. And so that's the basics of the application. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is that our first demo is going to actually extend on this. So the base workshop actually works by connecting the application directly to the YouTube APIs. And so that requires actually embedding an API key within the application, which is probably a little bit insecure because somebody could basically download the application and take the API key out of it. So this step demo actually takes this one step further, and instead of calling directly to YouTube, it's actually the application is going to call to a backend server. So we actually have our server process here. So it's an ASP.NET Web API essentially. It's going to call to that. The Web API holds that API key and is able to connect to YouTube. But of course, in order to call our service, we need to protect that. And the way we're going to do that is we're actually using MCell to protect it, right? So the user will need to log in. Now, obviously, it's a little bit contrived, but bear with us for the purpose of the demo. So I'll just run up this example, you'll see that this is set to multiple startup projects. And so what this will do is it will start both the backend process, but also start up the Windows application. And because we've secured our service, what we should see is we should get like a 401 style exception where we're not authenticated. And we need to basically extend out our application to actually support that. And so here we go, application starting up. You'll see both the web API and the application startup. And as I forecasted, we got a 401 extension. And let me just stop because we're going to start to write some code. But before we do that, let me just bump the font of this instance of Visual Studio up as well. Let me switch to the application startup. So I mentioned here that we've got our host builder. So we basically create that and we can start wiring up things. So we're specifying the environment we're working on. If we're in debug, we're specifying some logging here. So we can control the different log levels based on whether we're in development or not. We can actually adjust the log level for different components. So the same way as you would with the typical iLogger. We can define where configuration's loaded from. So here we're just using the apps app settings. The only difference with Uno applications is that this settings file is typically embedded as a resource rather than being distributed as content. And that's to make sure that it works well with all of the target platforms. We're also wiring up some services. So this is our API service call that we'll use to connect to our backend service. And we're wiring up navigation and serialization as well. So what we need to add in here is support for MCell, and we'll do that by adding a block in here called use authentication. And as part of that, we're defining the MCell provider, and we're giving it a name. And this name is relevant or quite important because this is going to be the block within our configuration where we're going to look for our MCell client ID, etc. So I'll come into my development JSON, and I'm actually going to drop these into here. These are used for development access, so please don't use them for a production application. So that's going to get us started for using authentication. Now, of course, we then need to update our application to actually have a login screen. Now, I won't bore you with creating all of those pages. We've actually already got the pages for logging in here. What we need to do is actually just change our navigation. So instead of just launching the shell experience, we're going to change that to check to see whether we're authenticated. And if we're not, we're going to navigate to our login page. So we're going to do navigate view model login. Otherwise, we're going to navigate to our main model. Okay. And of course, in our login page, let me just double check to make sure that's all wired up correctly. Yep. Here, we're going to take a dependency on our iAuthentication service, and then we're going to call login on that. And once we're successfully logged in, then we're going to redirect back to our main model. So if I go ahead and click play on that, what we should see is that we should go to our login page, and from there I should be able to click the login button, which will prompt us to log into using MCell. Now Microsoft Entra. Okay, so let's go to our Windows application. So again, we're going to see this 401 exception, but if I allow that to continue playing, we've got our login prompt. I'll click login on that. It's going to prompt me to sign in. Enter my password, and it's now signed in, and it's able to retrieve the information from that backend. Now, of course, probably want the ability to log out. Now, I'm no designer, so we're just going to put a button on our main page. But in order for us to actually log out, I also need to add some code to our main model. And so this main model will look familiar to what we saw in our calculator model before. It's a record. Again, we're using MVUX. But again, I can put my dependencies into the constructor there, and then I can add my method for logging out down here. Extra bracket on the end there, let's get rid of that. And so that's our logout method. Of course, on our page, I'm going to add in a button. I'm not a designer, so I'm just going to put it immediately after the navigation bar. And we're just going to put a button here that is data bound to our logout method. And of course, once we logged out of the system, we actually need to respond to that, because by default, the authentication service doesn't know how to navigate within your application. It doesn't know that when you log out, it actually needs to reroute to the login page. So if we come to our shell model, we actually have some code already in here that can handle the logout event on our authentication service. And you see here that it's just going to redirect back to our login model. Okay, so that should be enough to get us going. If I click run on that. Now, remembering that we've already signed into the application, and because of caching and things like that, it'll take us straight to our main page of our application. Okay, so our application's already logged in. Our logout button is rather randomly placed at the top here. So I'm going to click logout on that, and it's taken us back to the login prompt. So we've successfully seen how we can add authentication with a little bit of navigation into our application for TubePlayer. The next part of this demo, we're going to switch to another application, and this is going to be just a quick demonstration of how MAUI embedding works. And so this is actually our Sync Fusion sample application. It's in the UNO samples repository. I'm going to actually play it for a minute, and then we'll step through exactly what's actually going on here. So this is running on the Windows target, but it is available on the mobile targets for iOS and Android as well. It is using the Sync Fusion library for MAUI. And that comes with a number of controls that are, good for charting and PDF viewing, etc. And so what we'll see here is that when it loads, it's going to prompt us, because I'm not licensed at the moment, so it's just doing development. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click the first of these elements on here. And what we should see in the main area is a Sync Fusion control. Okay, so that's basically this area on the right-hand side is basically being rendered by MAUI, with the rest of the experience being rendered by the UNO platform. And so if we look at that in code, what we're seeing in our main page is we're seeing this embedding, so this MAUI host, and we're embedding this particular control. So this is actually essentially a MAUI control or a MAUI page, and we can see that over here in our sample. So if we look over here, it's under circular chart, and this is our center elevation. So essentially, this XAML is basically coming from MAUI. It is a MAUI page. And in fact, this whole MAUI controls project that's here is essentially a MAUI project library. The glue that we need to get this all to work is in our app.cs. We basically say use MAUI embedding, and then we call to use MAUI embedding method there to basically initialize anything we need to in the MAUI domain. And that's as simple as it gets. Sorry, one last thing. The only thing that you need from our side is you need a reference to extensions maui.winui, and you will need a reference to the MAUI control libraries down here. If you go through the wizard as part of getting started, you'll actually see that there's a MAUI embedding option that under features. If you tick that option, you actually get that MAUI project added to your project, and everything else will be wired up so that you're all ready to go. And you don't need to configure any of this information. Now, the next demo is one to do with the non-UI side of the UNO platform. And so what I'm going to do is open up a page here that shows a list of the internal APIs that are available that are not UI related. So this is unexpectedapis.azure.websites.net. You can go to that on your own browser. And so there's a series of non-UI APIs that we can go through and test. They've got some sample code at the bottom, so basically you can copy that to your clipboard, and you can go through and interact with them and see how they behave. So note that this is all happening within the browser, and so I can click on this. So this is network information. I can click Observe Connectivity, and if I bring up my browser tools here, let's actually see browser tools. It's not going to work. Browser tools once more. I come in here and pick my offline option. This is a custom one that I've created. And what we'll see here is that it's come up with a big red mark, basically say you're no longer connected to the internet. Of course, to make sure I don't forget this later on, I'm going to turn this back to no throttling, and we see that we're now connected. Okay, so that's network information. There's also things like accelerometer. And again, remembering that this is all within the browser, If I click on observe the accelerometer, I'm actually on a laptop at the moment, so I can pick my laptop up and start moving that, and you'll see that the values here have changed in the accelerometer. The file system, we can actually go ahead and pick folders, and as you imagine here, we're going to get a prompt to basically go and browse folders on our desktop. And when we do that, let me pick the pictures folder, for example, select that folder. I'm going to get a permissions thing from the browser, basically say, do you grant permissions to actually view those files? And so you can see the list of files. Once I click get file list, it should actually, actually, no, I think I picked a folder that didn't have any files. And so let's just try that again. Let's try this folder. There we go. We've got some files. Okay, so you can then go and create files and read and write to them to your heart's content. And you'll see down here, there's a number of things like clipboard that we have support for. We've got things like the compass and title bar, MIDI. There's even game controller support. So if you have your game controller, you can actually tie that in. And again, I'll make it clear that we're running in the context of a browser. So all of these APIs work. They'll also work in your desktop, and where applicable, they work on your mobile, etc. as well. Okay, so it's pretty incredible to have all these non-UI APIs that are all ready to go as well. Okay, we're almost into the last set of demos, and for the last one, we're going to return back to the UI side of things, and we're going to return to Figma. And essentially what we're going to do, this is the Figma file. It's available from, if you go to Figma, you can go to the community and under the Uno platform. If you just search for Uno platform, you'll see a number of resources that are available for getting started with the Uno platform. One of the main ones, so if you're interested in some of the sample projects, those are here. So the workshops for Simple Calc, YouTube Player, etc. There, you can go and click through those. And those have already got pre-canned examples that you can then grab the code from. If you want to get started with a new application, you can go ahead and grab the material toolkit. And so essentially this is combining styling a bunch of Figma components to make them work for the Uno platform, but also make them appropriately styled for the material design language. And so if I come to our sample application here, this is a instance of that material design file. And so it has things like the standard sample and example application. So when you go into here, you'll see that I've actually just restyled this or recolored it. But essentially this application here is you can go and browse through this. It's a good example of an application that you can build using the Figma components that are available in this toolkit. There's also some getting started instructions. So I'd highly recommend you browse through those. You can then jump into the theme page, and this is essentially if you're used to sort of things like atomic design, where things are broken down into elements and atomic atoms and modules and molecules, etc. You can start here and build up the smallest components of your style language, right? So for example, I can come here, pick on one of these, I can go over to the selected color, and I can go and modify that. So I can go and change it this to a different color. So I might change that to a blue. Now the problem with that is, as you can see here, is I've changed one of the colors of my design system. I then need to go and update it for all of them. Okay, that's going to be time consuming because there's a lot of them, and you need to make sure that they're all consistent with each other. If you do want to go down this road, an alternate here is I'll just undo this for a second, is to go to back up to the sample app, and you'll see on the side here, where is it? Sorry. What you actually want to do is you want to go to DSP import, which is in the plugin. Sorry, load the plugin. So this is the Uno platform plugin. If you need to find this, it's under resources. You can search for the Uno platform. And one of the things that's available under properties is this DSP import. So DSP is essentially a style package that you can generate from the material theme builder tool website. So let me just bring that onto screen. You can see it. So here I can come and customize my theme. So I can basically set some default colors. Let's pick a yellow, or yeah, that'll do. Green than that. Let's go brightish on there. Click close on that, and now I can go and export my rather obtuse theme. So that's saved to my downloads file. If I then come back to my Figma file, I can go import DSP theme, pick it from my downloads, and go and it will prompt me before I override it. Go confirm on that. And we should be good to go. Scroll down here and go back to Figma and then click out of here, and I'll see that my application is now completely restyled in a green. Okay, and you'll see that that style has gone through and updated all of the colors in our palette down here as well. Now, what I'm going to do is actually come to as if I was building my own application. And so what I've done here is grab a screenshot of something that I was going to create. And here I've basically gone ahead and started to create it. So to do that, you would start by going and creating a page using the page template. And then you could walk through basically creating the elements on there. Now, just not conscious of time, what I'm going to do is actually use this one that I've already created or already started creating. And I'm going to go back to my plugin. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to preview how this application or how this would look within the Uno platform plugin. So I'll go ahead and click on our main page, click the refresh button. Now, what I'm going to see here is essentially a running version of the design that I created in Figma. So it's been exported out of Figma into XAML, rendered within the context of this plugin, which is actually itself a Uno-based application. So it's a web version of it. It's a WASM application. And so we're actually seeing a rendering application. So when I'm interacting with this, I'm actually interacting with actual UI controls here. So this gives the designer almost very real-time feedback as to how their design is actually going to render within a running application. Better still, I can come to the export tab and I can export this particular code. Now, right now, I don't actually have an application that I can export and paste it into. So let me come back to my code window, and we're going to use the live wizard to create me a new application. So this is going to be my dating app. Click start on that. And we're going to go ahead with the blank. We'll go and customize that because there's a couple of things we want to add. We'll come down here under theme. I'm going to pick material, TSV import. Under features, I'm going to click on the toolkit, and that should be us pretty much good to go. So I'll go ahead and click create on that. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to give me the code that I can then run at the command line to generate a new application. Okay, so for example, if you're using VS Code or Rider and you don't have access to the Visual Studio wizard, you can come to this site, so new.platform.uno, and actually generate the code that you can then use to run a command line to create your application. So I'll copy that. I'll come to VS Code, and I'm just going to paste that into there and run it. Okay, so it's going to create me my solution. And then I'll go and go open folder, go C columns temp, dating app, and open that folder. And what we should see is that VS Code will actually start to light up and recognize this as an Uno platform application. Again, there is an Uno platform extension that you need to get from the extensions for VS Code, and that will light it up to enable debugging, IntelliSense, and hot reload, amongst other things in terms of the VS Code experience. So give it a second. You see that Uno platform XAML is running, so basically the IntelliSense for supporting XAML coding. And we've got our application there. It's registered the solution file, and we're going to pick the deployment target. Again, we'll use the GTK target for this, and we'll make sure we get the right debugger in a minute. What we're going to do is just go ahead and run that. We'll go start debugging. And see that. And actually, what I'm going to need to do is probably change the debugging target a little bit. Whilst doing that, let me just return to my plugin for a second, because there's one thing I just need to come in here and make sure we got set up. So for the application, I need to make sure that the application name here correlates to the name of the application that I've just created. I'll do that, dating app. I'll come back to my export tab. I'll click refresh to make sure that the class name and the namespace is set correctly. I'm going to select this page, click copy, and then I'm going to return to the application that I just created. So our application is now running. Okay, so here's our Hello Uno platform. If I come to here, I can go to our main page, which is somewhere here. And what we'll notice down here is that as I start to type in here and hit save, in the debug console, you're likely to see a message that says the debugging is not supported while the code is hot reload is not supported while it's actually debugging. Okay, so you won't see any changes there. So let me close my application, and I'm just going to run it again without debugging. And what we should see is that we're able to make code changes on the fly. And so our application is going to run. It's already got changes in there. So now if I go and remove that and click save, we should see that that hot reload will kick in and not update my running application. Wonderful. Okay, so we're just going to get one demo fail today. What I'm going to do is actually paste in the code that I had from Figma and run this up, and hopefully my UI will update accordingly. Okay, so we see our buttons. We'll see a background image. Now that's not the image that obviously came from the Figma, so I'm going to need to go ahead and update that. Let me close my applications quickly. I'll actually go and reveal in File Explorer. I'll just go to my downloads folder where I have this picture. Let me just copy that, drop that into the assets file. You see that appear in VS Code. And now in my the code for my application, I can come here and actually change this picture to be the name of the file that I've just dropped in, like so. Okay, and we'll give that one more run for good luck, and hopefully it should be looking much closer to the UI that we had in our Figma plugin. There we go. Okay, and that's the last part of this demo. So let me just switch back to the slides. And just in summary, so basically core components of the Uno platform are that it's flexible, productive, rich, beautiful. The idea is that you should have everything you need from design all the way through to deployment in terms of debugging and running your application. And the idea is for it to be a productive platform that you can go and build applications with. That's the last of this session. Let me just close off with some resources. So if you need to get hold of us, it's great getting started. There's the workshops. And there is also a new Discord service that we actively monitor as well. The team's pretty much available around the clock. We have people in most geographics around the world. So go and ask questions, interact with the community, etc. there. So make sure you come back in a couple of weeks' time. We're going to cover in-depth of C Markup. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to cover a little bit more in depth and flesh out that sample that we worked on in more detail around the Uno extensions and navigation and authentication. So, and that's it for this session. Feel free to raise questions in the chat, and I'll be contactable if you have questions going forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Nick. We do have one question. The first question is, do Uno apps run on Linux?
Yes, they do. And in fact, we do actually have support for debugging applications and actually developing applications on Linux. So you should be able to use VS Code there. If you do run into any issues on Linux, feel free to raise them. But yes, all of the tooling should be available there. And we're continuing to build our support, or better support for Linux, because we recognize that it's an area that people are interested in. And the support there is continuing to grow. So.
Amazing. I've also popped in the next session with Nick, which is on the 7th of March, so in 2 weeks' time. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you so much to Nick as well for his time. And we will see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone, and bye for now.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.